Also, ich möchte direkt das Mikrofon weitergeben. Sie wird
I'd
sich
like to
vorstellen.
pass on the mic directly. She's going to introduce herself and our next speaker. My name is Anna, and this is Gail.
That's it.
Thank you, Anna. It's really lovely to be back here. I said at the professionals meeting, it's always a real pleasure to come here. This is the 4th conference here I think I've been to. You sort of lose count over the years, but it's lovely to see some of the children and young people, having seen them when they're much younger and watching them progress and develop, and to spend time with them and with the parents again. So it's lovely to see some familiar faces, and it's also lovely to see some new faces. Similarly to Rob, I'll just fill you in on my background. I'm also a teacher. I started my work more years ago than I'm going to tell you. But I started in the field of special education. In England, you used to be able to do your initial degree in special education. I was very fortunate to be able to do that. Unfortunately, you can no longer do it that way. You have to do it later on, which I think is an issue because we're losing young, excited teachers, because by the time they've got through the initial teacher training and then do some teaching, they then don't want to go back to study. So it's a bit of a problem for us. Following on from that, I did some work as a teacher for the deaf. I trained as a teacher for the deaf. And a name that's cropped up earlier today is Jan van Dijk. My teaching placement, I spent 3 months in the Netherlands working with Jan. And for me, I think it changed my whole direction. And it was all this thing about being focused on the child and centered on the child. And he almost gave me permission to do things differently and to follow the child and not follow the textbook. And it was such a privilege to work with him. And he started me off on a certain route, and I thought, I really want to work with deaf-blind children. So I did more qualifications and started working with deaf-blind children. And then I was very fortunate to meet David Brown when he was still working in the UK. And I'd done some work with him with deaf-blind children. And then on my caseload in the local authority I was in, I was given a little girl with charge to work with. I thought, I don't know anything about charge, but it's okay because she's deaf-blind, so I'll take my mental toolkit and my bag of toys and I'll go and play with her. And we'll start off the way that we've always started off with these children. And I went on the home visit, and I came away from the home visit and thought, oh my goodness, none of that worked. Why didn't it work? So I rang David and went, David, I have a problem. And he was brilliant, and he said, just go with the child, do everything that you know is good to do. And I thought maybe it was just that little girl. But then about 6 months later, I met another child with charge, and the same thing happened again. I thought, oh, they really are different. And David is going, yeah, we do think they're different, so don't think you're going mad or anything. And that was the start of my journey with children with charge. And that was a long time ago. Those children are now adults, and it's wonderful. I can keep in touch with them. And I'm really privileged in my job to be able to work regularly with children and young people with charge. It's what I love to do, because they are so special, and they're so determined, and they're so funny, and they make me look at life in a different way. They forever challenge me, which I think is a good thing. I would say it's a positive thing that they led me to do my PhD, but that was David's fault. In a moment of weakness, he said, I was starting to write articles in the UK, and David said, you need to do a PhD. I went, yeah, okay. Ugh. I tell you, working full-time and studying is really tough. But maybe if you ask me in another year, when I've had a little bit more space from all the study that was involved with it, I'll be going, yeah, it's great to do a PhD. but I'm still in that phase of, oh my goodness, it was massive and my brain is still exhausted, I think. But it was good to do. And what I'm sharing with you today is a little bit of what came out during my process of studying this. So in the professional session, I did share a lot of my research findings because I looked at the education of children and young people with charge. So it was looking at what came out of it was potential learning characteristics and also strategies that we should be using in the classroom. But before I finished my PhD, I was already looking at this issue of social relationships and friendships because I realised that this was an area that we really need to be looking at. So that's a little bit of what I'm going to share with you today. This is my thoughts so far. It's also based on some of the work that I have been doing with children and young people, but I'm not there yet. So you may have some thoughts that you could share with me because it would be great to have some input from other people about things that they've found successful and help along the way. So that's where we're going to go this morning. This is a quote from two very lovely people sitting here. I still can't get my head around the fact that I'm with these people presenting alongside people like Tim and Nancy and David and Rob and people that have been in the field for a long time and have mentored me and taken me on a journey. And it's an ongoing cycle, and I think we have a responsibility to continue to try and bring people into the field who can help you. But I always find it a bit scary standing up here quoting from people that are sitting in the front row. So they're smiling very nicely, which is always encouraging. So this is from a part of the Charge Syndrome book that Nancy and Tim were involved in. And it's talking about social and emotional development. And it says that we use this term to describe growing children's ability to form close, secure relationships and to use their emotions productively in interactions with others. And then they go on to say later, it's apparent that many children with charge struggle to behave in a manner that promotes social relationships. So yesterday, we heard from some amazing young people with charge. And did you notice how many of them talked about friendships and what were important to them? Yeah, and the people that were important to them, the friendships. And I thought, yeah, it's really, really important. But I also know from working with lots of young people and young adults with charge is that making meaningful friendships and relationships can be very difficult. So this was something that started to challenge me, was the direction that I needed to be going in with this, to support them, to create those meaningful relationships. So there was a little bit of research out there, and funnily enough, these people's names crop up again. Okay, so a little while ago now, 2004, there was some research by Tim that Tim was involved with, and it was a questionnaire to families, and one of their primary concerns that parents expressed related to their child's difficulty in establishing same-age relationships. So this is a concern that parents have been expressing from way back. And then Jacques Suriot and some others also did a piece of research. And their research found that individuals with charge have difficulty with social exchanges, with turn-taking, and understanding the use of social rules. They also found that they have a preference for one-to-one relationships, and they tended to be a single relationship with an adult rather than with their peers. And then later on, Tim was involved in another piece of research, and this piece showed that there can be some difficulty with very little children with charge bonding securely with their parents. But the encouraging thing was they also found that given time, most do become securely attached. Is that right? Yep. I got the nod, so I did get it right. That's good. Phew. And, you know, we have to use this information and go, okay, so what does that mean for me supporting children and young people and their families every day in the work that I do? And I think this is step one in the process of the relationships, is that early bonding. Rob spoke earlier and said about how the bonding process can be interrupted because your baby might be in hospital a lot, there's lots of medical interventions, and it can be a difficult time for everybody. So one of the first things that I do now is I do get to work with babies that are only a few weeks old, which for me is great. I work 3 days a week in a borough in London now. I moved away from a job that I used to do because I was getting less and less contact with children. And now I've gone back to my roots, and 3 days a week I play with children and work with children, and I just love it. It's just taken me back to everything that I love to do. And strangely, the last 3 months, we've had 3 charge babies in just one London borough. And 2 of those babies are still in hospital, and so I go and work in the hospital. And one of the things that I'm aware of is that early bonding relationship for the child and the parents. So one of the things that we've done is brought in somebody that knows about infant massage, because so many of those babies' early experiences of touch are pain and those medical interventions and people pulling them around and everything. So we're teaching the parents how to do infant massage so that the baby is getting a positive experience of touch. And it also gives the parents an opportunity to feel that there's something that they can do, because so many parents say to us, we feel helpless. One of the babies I'm working with, you can only get at his feet because he's got so much going on, and he's got an oxygen with. I don't know if they do it in other countries, but when they're tiny and they need oxygen, they put these plastic boxes over their head. And it's just, getting to the child is really difficult. I get frustrated, so how do those parents feel? So they're doing infant massage on the baby's feet. So that's the starting point, I think, of the bonding relationship. But what I'm going to talk to you about mainly today is about what happens when the child gets to nursery and to school and to college, and what we can do to support those social relationships. So I asked a few people to tell me what they thought friendship was. And these are just some of the things that they spoke to me about. It's a relationship between 2 people who care about each other. It's about mutual affection. It's about altruism, so putting the other person's needs before your own and caring for them and doing things to support them and help them. It's about shared interests and experiences. It's two-way, requires regular contact. There has to be honesty in the relationship. It's a personal, reciprocal relationship. A friend accepts you as you are, and that's a big one that I talk about with young people that I'm working with. It's okay to be the person that you are. It took me a long time to get to grips with the fact that I'm not a Rob Last. I'm not woohoo! And it actually takes a lot for me to stand up and speak to people, because as Connie said, I'm actually quite a reserved, shy person. The reason I can stand and talk to you today is because this is Gail, the professional, and that gives me something to hide behind. Yeah? And that's actually a way that I get through these, because it actually is, it's quite nerve-wracking, no matter how many times you do it, standing up and talking in front of people. So I talk to people with charge and say, okay, it's good to be the person that you are. You're an amazing person, the way that you are. We're all made differently. And a friend will accept you as you are. You know, my friends don't expect me to be this wacky, off-the-wall person. That's not who I am, and they know that, and that's okay. Yeah. So a friend is kind and acts as a positive influence on your life, and there is empathy. Okay, so when I started looking at that, thinking, okay, so this is what we're looking at. I'm now going to share with you just a little bit of my research. It was 80,000 words, the final thesis, so I'm not going to share all that with you. At the end of the presentation, you'll see that there is a link to my thesis, and you can access it electronically if you're interested. But I would say just read the last 2 chapters. Don't worry about the rest of it. So, my supervisor would shoot me if she heard that. So this was my medical research question that I came up with. Charge syndrome is a medical diagnosis. Can it also be an educational diagnosis? So if we're working to support children and young people in an educational setting with charge, are there particular things that we need to be looking at, and are there particular ways of working that we need to be considering? And the overall answer was, yes, there is. But it took me 80,000 words to come to, yes, there is. So the research, first of all, I did something called document analysis. So I had 58 reports, education reports, and from that I pulled out every single statement that mentioned about the child learning and development and education. And then I had to do this wacky coding, and my computer looked like a rainbow with all the different colours that were involved. But from that, it led me to a questionnaire. And it was a questionnaire to teachers. And this is one of the things that I know about parents of children with charge. They are amazing at getting things done. And you have witness to that here, the fact this conference is now in its 10th year, this organisation. Because I contacted every family through every means possible in the UK of a child with charge. So families, not just that are known to me, but through social media, through different network groups. And those parents were amazing. They said, yes, talk to my child's teacher. And a week later, if the teacher hadn't contacted me and given me email details, the parents were, have they contacted you? I'll get after them. And then 4 weeks later is, have they returned the questionnaire to you? So the parents were such an important part in me getting these responses back. So it was great. I also did interviews. I was fortunate to go to Perkins, where at the time they had 27 students with charge. So I was able to go and do some interviews with the staff there. So from the questionnaire responses that I got, it showed that the children and young people were in a range of different educational settings, from schools for children with profound and multiple learning difficulties, right through to children in mainstream settings and other specialist settings. So a school for the deaf, schools for children with moderate learning difficulties, all those sorts of things. And I think the different settings that they were in is maybe an illustration of the wide range that we get in charge. Yeah, and about the fact of which educational setting is best to meet each child's needs. But I think it's also to do with what's available to you locally, what your national policy is on inclusion. Is there an inclusion policy? Are children included in mainstream regular schools? Or is the policy that they will be in segregated schools? And it's also about parental choice, certainly in the UK. Parental choice is very powerful, and rightly so. The problem is when the child's choice is different to the parent's choice, and then we have to go through quite a lot of mediation. It was also a range of children right across the different age groups. So the research the findings that I had were for a spread of different schools and a spread of ages, which was quite helpful, I think. So one of the areas that I looked at a lot of different skill areas. I looked at 21 different skill areas, and the teachers' perceptions of how easy or difficult children were finding the development in these skill areas. And then after that, we looked at strategies. So one of the things that I asked them first was, how many secure relationships they perceive the child or young person to have with adults in school. Okay, so the range that I got were people saying none, right the way through to more than 10. I think the most was 15. So there was quite a range there. So the average was 5.73. So it's quite reasonable, yeah? And the ones with the most relationships with adults were those young people in mainstream secondary school, so 11 plus, which you would expect because they've got different subject teachers. But it's good that they're forming those relationships. So that was encouraging to start with. So then following that, I asked how many genuine relationships they thought the children had with peers. Again, the range was 0 to 10, but this time the average was 1.73, far lower. But I shared this at the Professionals Day, I actually cried when I came up with this data because half of the cohort of children were perceived to have no friendships. So incredibly isolated. And that really upset me. So then I thought, I know, I'll look at the 5 children who are considered to have more than 10 secure relationships with adults, because perhaps they're more successful in forming relationships with their peers. So I looked at that, and yes, they were a little bit more successful, but it was only 2.8. And 2 of those children were still perceived to have no friendship relationships. So I thought, oh my goodness, I need to start doing something about this. So the first thing I had to think of was, why might that be? And I thought, well, maybe there's poor communication skills. And Rob's talked a lot about communication and supporting the development of communication. And I think that's one of the things that parents are really involved with very early on. But unfortunately, once your child gets to school, a lot of it is out of your hands, so to speak, isn't it? And it's about whether the school chooses to engage with the family and continue to work with them. And I would say to you all, push, really push to be involved in every decision that's made about your child. Okay, because so many times I go to schools and I see a child and something's happened, and I go, oh, and have you spoken to the parents about this? And they say, no. Yeah. Okay, well, let's go and talk to the parents about this. And then the parents come out with all this amazing information because you know your child better than anybody. Yeah, so don't be afraid to push to be involved in that. But I think it can be as well, the problems with the formation of friendships can be other demands being placed upon the child, difficulty recognising their own emotional state and empathising with others, self-regulation. Tim has been involved in a number of really good articles recently on self-regulation in a journal called Deafblind International, DBI Review. And your teachers should be able to get hold of that. And they're really, really helpful articles. I've been giving them out to lots of the families and the teachers that I work with. Executive function difficulties, which we're not going to discuss here because it's a whole half a day in itself at least. And also the peers and the adults around the child or the young person are really very important. So the challenge in school is to identify and implement strategies to support peer interactions and the development of meaningful peer relationships. That was the challenge to me. So it was, okay, what do I do about it? Therefore, what can I suggest to other people to help them make things better as well? So I think one of the important things is that we've talked about a lot this weekend is about the importance of focusing on the children's strengths to support the things that they're not so good at. And one thing I know about children with charge is that they are very socially aware. They're really interested in people, particularly babies. You often find they really want to get up close to babies. But they are very socially aware people. And so I have some young adults with Charge that really follow what's going on social media, even though they choose not to contribute themselves, because they're very socially aware. Okay? But what I also know is that they're often very socially inept. So they're really aware, but they don't know how to deal with that and what they should be doing. So it's about helping them develop their skills. But I think one of the things I've also learned is that it's important not to put our perception of friendship onto them. Okay? Because some of the young people with Charge that I work with, we're very fortunate to have a group of very able individuals with Charge that can express things to us. And Nancy talked about this in the Professionals Day. And they say things, and I think, yeah, that's really helpful, that's really insightful. And then I can apply that to the children and young people that can't express that to me. Yeah? And one of the things that they've shown me over time is that maybe their perception of friendship, what they want out of friendship, is different to me. So I have two young men with Charge that I'm in regular contact with, both in their 20s, and both of them conduct their meaningful relationships with their peers through Skype and through other social media. They don't like to meet up because, oh, you ought to meet up, go to a football match together, because they talk about football, two of the young men, and they don't want to meet up. They want to do it through Facebook. And when I've talked to them about why, one young man, Mark, will say, well, if I do it through that, I have time to think about what they're saying to me because he can read it. He said, I can have a paddy. That's an English word for getting a bit cross, yeah, and having a bit. And his parents say he does. You hear him stamping around his room because he really doesn't agree with what's being written down. But then, having stamped around, he can self-regulate and then give a response that he knows won't be upsetting to the other person. So in some ways, he's protecting that relationship. And how clever is that? Yeah. But his idea of social relationships and friendships is about conducting it in that way, not my idea of going around and dropping in to see a friend and having a cup of tea with them. Yeah. So it may be different. So rather than friendships, I've now come to this point where I say to teachers, it's about supporting meaningful peer relationships. Because if I do that, it keeps it on neutral ground, and teachers don't start putting their perceptions of friendship onto the young person. So I'm trying to keep that a little bit separate. Parents are very good at supporting the development of these meaningful relationships for their children. But you need support from schools to take it further. You need support from the teachers, so the teachers need to be skilled up to know how they can support this. So one of the things in the research, just a little bit, is about some of the research findings, and these were what the class teachers reported to be most helpful. So this wasn't coming from literature, it wasn't coming from me telling them what to do, this was what they felt were the most helpful things. And actually the first one's really important, about access to a peer group with appropriate communication skills. Yeah. Rob talked a lot about sign language and the development of sign language. As parents, what the rich resources are out there for you to learn to develop sign language. And why do you do that? So you can communicate more effectively with your child. So how can children develop meaningful relationships with their peers if their peer group can't communicate with them? Okay, so I've got a couple of youngsters who are in mainstream schools, and we do class signing lessons. And the speech language therapist is in every week, and she has a slot and does signing for the whole class. And the other kids love it, I have to say, because they've now worked out that when the teacher's back is turned, they can communicate with each other without the teacher knowing, which I think is really cool that they do that. And we also have like a sign of the week, and it's posted up all the way around the schools, and it's on the end. A lot of our schools have the big screens with a rolling photographs and everything on it when you come into school. And it has sign of the week, and every visitor is encouraged to learn the sign of the week. So it's really important that if your child is a sign language user, that they have access to a peer group who can also sign with them. They said they'll need support to learn to initiate and sustain social interaction sequences. And I understand that. I think there's a number of reasons why children with charge struggle with initiating and then maintaining them. So, for example, a young lady that I work with, who some of her photos are on here, we realised that she desperately wanted to engage with her peers, but she didn't know how to initiate it. So we taught her. So she now goes up to somebody and she stands very close because her vision is so poor. So she has to get really up close and personal. So she gets up really close and she goes, so she signs good morning and then she stands and looks at you. Because she doesn't know what to do next, but at least she's able to initiate now. So we're now working on that. Okay, so how do you sustain it? How do you move it on to the next thing? And some of that is about providing them with a communication sequence. So I can't remember which speaker was saying that they have a repertoire. Oh, I think it was David. So they have a repertoire of words, of questions, and they might come, what colour is your car? Yeah. How many animals? And I have that with one young man. How many animals do you? And unfortunately, we've got quite a lot of animals because the next thing is, what's their name? And we've got 2 horses, 2 dogs, 7 ducks, and all sorts of things. And you go, oh, crumbs! Can I remember all the ducks' names? No, I can't. But it's that sort of thing that actually it helps sustain the social interaction and keeping that going. And then it's a structured program to support them to develop and understand their own and others' emotions. Okay, because that's something. For those of you that were here 2 years ago, was it 2 years ago? I presented about a young lady called Jenny. I can't remember if that's 2 years ago or 4 years ago. It all merges. But it was about the fact that this was a young teenager at the time. She's now 19. And I'm going to bring you up to date with her in a little while, and realised very much that she needed a structured program to develop her understanding of emotions, because only then could she then empathise with her peers. Okay, and you need to be able to have that empathy to help support a meaningful relationship, because otherwise you respond inappropriately, you do inappropriate things, and you don't understand the impact of that on your peers. And also, teachers are very keen to have an environmental audit. So it's about looking at what's physically in the environment that can support the social and emotional needs. But it's not about just physically the building. That environmental audit includes the people. So you need friends, peers who are actually keen and willing to engage. And one of the things I'll often say when we're starting to do activities at playtime is get the support assistant to point out to me children that naturally want to be with that child or young person with charge. You will find them, they are there. There are some that naturally want to be with them, and others that couldn't give 2 hoots. That's an English expression, but sorry, interpreters. But, would choose not to be with them. And that's part of what that environmental audit is about. And then it's also about developing a structured program and activities to support those peer interactions. So I thought, okay, from my research, this is what the class teachers are telling me that I need to look at and I need to do. So how am I going to go about doing that? So one of the things that's important to me, I put photos on because I love having photos, but it reminds me that I'm on the right slide. So I'm talking to you in English about what's up there in German. So it's about classroom culture. It's about what is happening in the classroom. And I realise that far too often I go into classrooms and the young person with charge has a support person with them, and the support person engages with them, and the class teacher never engages with them, doesn't even seem to acknowledge their presence in the classroom. because they're caught up with all the other children. So one of the things I do is talk to the class teacher about the need for them to show approval, because it increases the social standing of the child by the adults, because the adults show that they enjoy being around them. So one little chap I was with, they were due to have a PE session, and I talked to the teacher about this, and she said, okay, I'm going to pair with Mahid in the PE session. And it's a primary school, and they had a little circuit that they had to do. It involved throwing a ball to your partner, and then you move on to the next cone, your partner throws it back to you. And she paired up with him, and she made a big thing about how much fun she was having. Now, this is a little lad who, in the group, when they're waiting for the activity, would always sit at the back and be slightly on his own. And I couldn't believe the difference. She did that 5 minutes later. Peers in the class are saying, come and sit next to me. Mahid, sit with me. Sit here, sit here. Just because the teacher had demonstrated what fun he was to be around. And I thought, wow, it's not always that easy, but when it is that easy, you just think, yes, this makes the difference. And it was really meaningful to the teacher, because afterwards she said, wow. She said, not me, her. She said she didn't realise how powerful she was in that situation. So it's about skilling the teachers up and making them realise that they can make a difference, because I think sometimes they're just not sure what to do. It's about establishing a classroom culture that allows for differences and celebrates what makes each child unique. So I do teaching with the whole class, and we have circle time. You have circle time in Germany where they all sit around, and you may have a shell or something that they pass around, so each person in turn speaks. You can only speak when you're holding this thing, which, by the by, is a great concrete cue for children with charge to know when their turn is coming, because they see it coming around the classroom, and then they're ready, and then it's their turn, and they know this is a time when they get to speak up. So it's about them finding out about each other. And so first of all, I'll get them to go around, and they have to look at the person next to them and then say one thing that they like about that person. And then I give them time to talk, and they have to find two things that are the same. So I have two sisters, or I have a brother, or where I live in a block of flats, I live in a house, those sorts of things. And then they have to find out some things that are different. And then they start to realise, we talk about the fact that some of the children find maths easy, some of the children find maths hard. And it's that starting process that just says, we're all different. So we're not talking about the child with charge, we're talking about every member of that class being unique and individual, because we know that there's a really strong desire to conform. Children want to be the same as each other, and it's about highlighting to them, but actually you're all different, and it's wonderful that you're all different. And I show them, I put together a photograph of a class, and one is a class, and it's all of the same child. So it's the same photo of the child, and I superimpose it again and again and again. And then I give them a photograph of a class of all different children. And I say, which class would you prefer to belong to? And they all go for the mixed class. And when you ask them why they don't want to be in that other class, it's because everyone's the same, everybody's going to do the same thing, and they're just so good at it when you actually start talking to them about it. So for teachers, it's about that classroom culture as a whole. And then I also talk to them about accentuating the positives, because very often in classrooms they reward and positive academic performance. Yeah? So you learn your 4 times table, you get a star on the chart. Yeah? All those sorts of things. But it's about developing a reward system for helpfulness, for kindness. So one little lad with charge, he's just learnt to sit in the group at carpet time. That's been, the whole of this academic year, that's what we've been working on, is getting him to sit in the group during group time on the carpet. And he went to sit on the carpet, and it was facing the wrong way. So he's facing the back of the classroom and everybody's facing the front. So one of his friends just very gently put his arm around him and helped wiggle him around on his bottom until he was facing the right direction. And the teacher spotted it and said, that was really helpful, really kind. Have a token, because they've got this reward system going on. So it's about rewarding that sort of behaviour as well as the academic performance. And it's also about giving the child responsibilities. Children with charge are often not given responsibilities in the classroom because teachers think they've got enough to cope with. But give them responsibilities. One little lad that I work with, his responsibility is to put the overhead lights off when they're using the whiteboard. Yeah? And it's so wonderful because he now jumps up and goes, me, me, me. And if he's late, his friends are going, you, up there, turn the lights off. And it's really lovely. Another young man that's actually got really complex needs, so developmentally, there's quite a lot of difference between him and his peers. Rather than the fruit at break time just being placed in a bowl on the table, he holds the bowl, and so they have to go to him to get the fruit. Yeah, so there are ways that we can do it. We just have to be a bit creative and imaginative. Social skills, this is one where you parents really come in. It's really, really important. Rob mentioned about Annie Sullivan and Helen Keller and the mealtime, and it not being acceptable for her to go around and take food off everybody's plate and just wander around. Yeah. Parents are so powerful and have such a good role to play in actually supporting social skills. So I think, okay, what do they need to be able to do? So they need to be able to participate appropriately in a group, in a small group, and that can start in the family home, yeah? And then it progresses on. But the skills need to be continued when they get to school, so it's something that the teachers need to take forward. And I have young teenagers with charge, where one of the things about responding appropriately in a small group is actually group discussion and learning how to take their turn and also it's the thing about respecting other people's views if they're different to your own. That's really tough in a group for some of the teenagers because you know how youngsters with charge are very driven and they're very focused and they have their viewpoint. It's a bit like Mark saying, I stamp around the room because he's learned that his view might not be held by his friends, but it still makes him very cross that they don't agree with him. Yeah, so it's okay to have different opinions. That they're able to respond to requests and demands from the class teacher. That's a really important social skill. That they can tidy their work up and line up appropriately. If you go into schools, it makes me so frustrated when the children have to line up for lunchtime or to go to assembly or something, and the child with charge is allowed to barge in the front. They muscle in and go right to the front of the queue. Now, if any other child does that, they're told, no, you go to the back of the line. It has to be the same for the child with charge. Yeah? I feel really strongly about that you have the same expectations. That they can sit still on the carpet with others. Sometimes they might need a little bit more supportive seating. We have what we call move and sit cushions. They're plastic cushions, air-filled with bubbles on them, and the child can sit and wiggle on them. Or a cushion to sit on, or they have a fiddle to hold, something to stimulate their sensory systems that allow them to stay in place. Or we may use a timer for children that find it really difficult. So it might be that they just stay there for 10 seconds. Then they're allowed to get up and move away. With some of the very little ones that we work with, that's where we start. Able to take turns. That beautiful video where Jonas is learning to take turns in the card matching game. Every time I see that, it just makes me laugh when Jonas realises that his daddy hasn't got any pairs, because apparently that is the first time that he won in that game, which is also, I was talking to one of my colleagues from England and saying, isn't it great that he didn't just let him win, he had to earn it? Yeah, it's a really important skill that they learn. Caring for others and being aware of their feelings. That's a huge issue for young people and children with charge. Okay, I talked about a young lady, Jenny, when I was here before. And for those of you that haven't heard me talk about her, she's one of the young ladies that's been very influential on the way I work now. She has taught me so much. I first met her when she was about 13, and she moved down to the south of England to a school that I went into. I didn't know she was there, but I arrived and the head teacher said, "Oh, we've got a young lady with charge, you need to come and see her." And she'd been expelled from her previous mainstream school. She'd been out of school for 2 years. And the educational psychologist on the first day that I was there said to me, "This is her last chance. If this school doesn't work for her, she won't be anywhere." Okay, no pressure. But started working with her, and she did have some hugely inappropriate behaviours. A very able young lady, but she would do things like in the playground, she pulled down the trousers and underpants of a girl, a 14-year-old girl in the playground. It's really not socially acceptable, and it's not the way to make friends. And she'd call people names, and really awful names that I would never repeat. And I thought, okay, so how do we tackle this? Is this actually her behaviour, or what's going on here? I realised very quickly that this young lady had a very analytical understanding of emotions. Her vocabulary, her repertoire was enormous. And she could look at any picture, and if you described a social situation to her, she would name how those people were feeling. But what I realised was she didn't recognise her own emotional state. And I often say this, David talks about children not communicating with their bodies. And if you can't communicate with your body in a physical way, how do you communicate with your body about your emotions? How do you understand your own emotional state? So she was in a fabulous school and worked very closely with a teacher. And it took us 2 years of a very structured program about her understanding her own emotions. And I did present on that last time. But very briefly, it was about naming her own emotional state for her. It was about giving her a rating scale of 0 to 10. 0 is when I'm absolutely fine and calm. 10 is about when I'm really losing it. Yeah, and all those stages in between. And I knew we were getting somewhere when, after about 18 months, she said, she was telling me that she was going to New York with her mum. And she was talking to me, and she suddenly went, Gail, I can feel something. Yes, you can feel something. What can you feel? I don't know. Okay, right, okay, but at least we're getting there. So I then named her emotions for her and said, well, you're probably a bit excited, a bit anxious, and we talked about all those things. And I shared at the professional day, the time when I knew this had really made an impact on her was when she was in hospital not very long ago for a kidney transplant. And we'd done some work with the special needs nurse in that it's a hospital, it's the one that Jeremy's involved with. It's very good for children and young people with special needs. And they'd got a particular nurse that I'd been talking to on the phone. The night before her operation, this young lady said to the nurse, I'm frightened, I'm scared. And to me, that's one of the best things is, wow, it took all that work, but we've got to a point where that young lady now recognises her own emotional state. And you know, because she's able to do that now, she's actually really able to empathise with her peers. And so she now doesn't do the name calling. And when one of the teaching assistants lost her father recently, she was talking to me saying, she must be really sad, really upset because she's not going to see him again. And I was just, wow, she's really getting there. She still has moments. We do still have moments, I have to say. But she has made so much progress. And that was about a focus on helping her to understand her own emotions so that she can share that with others and empathise with others. And that's part of what this emotional literacy is that we talk about. This is quite a recent concept. Recent, she says it was late 1990s. Was it? Nancy's nodding, oh good. And it's about the ability to understand your own emotions. It's about the ability to listen to others and to empathize with them. And it's about expressing your emotions productively. And it's about it being really important because it empowers the young person and it improves their own quality of life and it helps improve relationships and it also facilitates a feeling of community, of being part of a community. And that hopefully overcomes some of the social isolation that we know children and young people with charge can be very vulnerable to. I just feel I want to stop when I've talked about the youngsters like Jenny, because she's just so amazing. You think you can't beat that, can you? Okay, but one of the other things in schools that we want to do is about linking them up with their peers. And it's about creating opportunities. So sometimes you have to engineer it. You can't assume that it's just going to happen. So it's about promoting connections and common interests. Rob sort of did that beautiful one about the two lads that go and look at lifts together. Yeah, it's a shared interest. It's great. That's where we start. It's also about what we call buddy systems. Do you have buddy systems in Germany? Okay. It's about pairing children up strategically. So it's about me talking to that teaching assistant and say, which of this class are children that would naturally engage with the child with peer? Who's naturally interested in him or her? And we just a little bit of strategic work to pair them up. And it's about peer support. It's something called Circle of Friends, which I have talked about in previous conferences about. It's identifying those children and young people to provide a network and a social support group. And it's with young children, we tend to do it with things through, we have almost a social skills group, but we make biscuits together. So there's this little network of friends and they have biscuits and they're all keeper of something. So one's keeper of the Smarties, one's keeper of the chocolate sprinkles that you put on, one's keeper of something else. So you have to engage and interact with the group, but it's also about looking after each other. Oh, you haven't got any Smarties. Would you like some? Okay, and it's about that basic support that we start at that level. And by working in that way, when you get them older and you start working with them, so a young man that I know pretty well, whose social skills were okay, but he was very on the fringe of things. But his self-organisational skills were appalling, absolutely appalling. He really struggled, so we did a lot of structured work. And it's lovely because one of my colleagues from the UK is working with this young man now, and she says his self-organisational skills have really improved, so I'm glad to hear that. But one of the things that we did with him was set up this circle of friends around him, so some really good mates. He was about 14 at the time, I think. And I was in for a visit, and he was due to go swimming. Now, I'd seen him at the start of the day with his swimming bag. By the end of the day, it was lunchtime, I saw him in the hall, and he told me he was going swimming. So great, he'd got it on his timetable, and he knew where he was off to. But I said to him, well, where's your swimming bag? Oh. So he'd clearly put it down somewhere. At that point, one of his mates had obviously seen his bag and probably he'd left it in the previous lesson or something, came charging through the wall, went, duh, you forgot this, shoved it in his direction and went off again. That's actually a circle of friends. That's actually how they relate to each other. It's not about all the niceties of, oh, did you know you've forgotten your swimming bag? Oh, let me go and find... it was just a, duh, you forgot this, and off he went again. Much more natural engagement with a peer group of that age. Another young man who was 15 at the time was, he'd arrive in school, and in England we have school uniforms. So he'd have his shirt tucked in because it's school regulation, have the top button done up, have his tie done up, his jacket was on, hair all neat and tidy. Now, most lads by the age of 15 don't come to school like that, and it makes him different and it singles him out. So one of his circle of friends, I said, do you mind if I show him how you're dressed? It will mean that he'll need to touch you, but do you mind? I went, no, it's cool. It's fine. I could do that. I went, great. So we did. We then showed this man, look, his shirt is not tucked in. He hasn't got his button done up. His tie is undone. His hair's all messed up and spiky, and he's got it gelled and everything. Next day, this lad, apparently, I wasn't in school the next day, but apparently he came into school like that. And I'm not sure his teachers were very pleased, but I was thrilled because that means that he's part of that group of friends. And what a great mate. What a great friend. To allow him to do that, you know, because most 15-year-old boys, they don't touch each other, do they? Certainly not in England, with the culture of, oh dear. Yeah, so actually for somebody to allow him to do that is very, very special. So, again, we've talked about social media. That shared interest, that's a great way of connecting people up. The only thing I would say is that you need to put some steps in to protect them. Because one young lady I work with, a very capable young lady, but very black and white in her thinking. And somebody from the States had got in touch with her on Facebook and said they were a friend. They friended her. So therefore, they are a friend. That person then asked her to take photographs of herself and to send them to him. Thankfully, we intercepted it. But, you know, you do need to think about keeping them safe. The immediate response from the school was, well, we won't give her access. I go, yeah, but actually, she's 17. By the time she's 18, she's got complete freedom of choice about what she does. So actually, the better thing is for us to teach her how to be safe in using these things and explaining them to her. And we actually set up a closed group with a group of friends. And there is someone that, I've forgotten the name of the person that manages it and oversees it. But there is someone that actually checks what's going into those messages and what's being shared. But it is about keeping them safe as well. Shared experiences. Okay, for younger children, you can use sharing experiences like carrying a box together to help the teacher. If you've got playtime or PE and you've got a box of materials that you want, resources that you want, get that child to carry it with somebody else. I have to say there's so many sensory issues around there that really help them as well, because it weights them down, gives them something to hold on to, and the other child actually balances them in the process. So it's actually a really great way to do that. Use play to facilitate social and emotional awareness. And initially, when I was doing this work, my first case studies were on teenagers, and I thought, oh, hang on, I need to go right back and start in the very early years. So last week, I was working with a 2-year-old, and I shared at the Professionals' Day that she's very isolated in her play, she's very contained, she's very in control, she's in charge, she's got charge, so she's got to be in charge. Yeah, and she is becoming isolated because she's not even engaging in parallel play, particularly alongside her peers. So I was working with her, and initially she got very angry with me, very cross, but after an hour and a half, she let me engage in her play activity, and I was allowed to put a brick on her tower. And then she put one on, and then I put one on, and we got into turn-taking, and then she gave me a brick and let me put it on. And part of that social awareness was saying to her, I really enjoy being with you. You know, the teaching assistant that works with her, the nursery nurse, was saying, Gail, you're so quiet when you talk with me, and I tend to be with you guys, but you get with the kids, and you know you have to be animated. And so I was, yeah, wow, great. Oh, I can have it. Oh, thank you. And I was really excited. And your whole body language and facial expression and everything says, yeah, this is really great. And you could see her almost clocking, ooh, okay, she quite enjoys being with me. You get that social awareness that it's fun to be working and engaging and playing with other people. Small group work is really important, where it's put into the timetable. And in mainstream secondary schools, I advocate this as well. because they can do the same work, but doing it in a small group, and it helps share the experiences. Because often if you've got big group discussions going on, it's really hard for the hearing impaired youngster and the visually impaired youngster, so the children with charge, to actually get all that information. So if it's in a smaller group, it's easier for them. But what we also do is we make those groups consistent. So it's the same group of peers every time. And it really helps with the social relate, because then you find that they go to a certain room for the group session and they've started walking back together, whereas the child with charge was trailing behind at the back. They're now starting to engage because actually they're realising that the young person with charge can. Yeah, so those small groups are really good. And it's also about sharing activities that everyone can participate in and enjoy. Okay, things that they can do together. Playtime is one of my most favourite times for supporting peer interactions that will help lead to these meaningful friendships and relationships. It's such a great place to foster this, I think partly because it's not bound by the target of the teaching session. You know, in the UK, I don't know about in Germany or in the other countries that you're from, but in the UK, there is so much pressure on teachers to get through the curriculum and to get the children to a certain point. And they are so driven. And then I go in and say, could we do things a little bit differently? And you can just see them go, oh no, something else to think about. So it's about being supportive to those teachers and encouraging them. But playtime, there tends not to be any limits and rules as to what the children are learning. And actually, one of the sad things is that teachers don't often realise the importance of playtime. They kick the kids out of the door, and they go and get a cup of tea, or they're frantically getting ready for the next lesson. Okay, and it's not utilised, I think, as well as it could be. So I always get there in time to go out to playtime with them, and I take people out with me. So it's about modelling and facilitating interactions between the children and the young people. Okay, it's about familiar adults, not just standing together, because you see that as well. They're keeping an eye on the children, but they're standing with another adult and they're chatting to the adult. Or they're just standing there with a cup of tea. Well, that's what happens in England anyway. And I go, no, you need to be playing. You need to be in there. You need to be doing it with them. And so getting the adults to engage and to model it, and also to scaffold it and support the interactions between children. So, for example, I was in a school recently, and we decided we were going to teach the young lady that I was working with how to play hide and seek. Yeah, do you all know what hide and seek is? Yeah? Jolly good. So, I had the teaching assistant that works with this young lady and myself, and I said to her, find a child that you think would like to play with Janet, and we'll carry on and do it together. And teaching assistant, she knows, again, who those children are that are likely to engage and want to engage. So found a little girl. So first of all, the teaching assistant went and hid. She went, you want me to hide in the playground? Yeah, I do. So off she went and she hid. I said, but do it so that we can actually see you a little bit. I said, because this child hasn't got very good vision. I said, so don't hide too well, because otherwise I won't know where you are. So then me and the peer and the little girl, Janet, we then hid together and we counted up to 10. We only counted to 10. But we hid our eyes and we counted to 10. And you know, this other child, I could have taken her home with me. I just wanted to hug her, and she was amazing because she knew where the teaching assistant had hidden, because she could see her. And she took Janet up the stairs, down the stairs, round the back of the climb frame. Is she here? No. Where is she? Because I was going, where is this? So she, all right, where is she? And then we went to and it took about 10 minutes to find the teaching assistant. How amazing is that little girl? Oh, she was star of the week in my book. So then, after that, we swapped it around. But then this other child hid with Janet. They went off and hid together. And the teaching assistant and myself hid and counted to 10, and then went to look for them. Yeah. And then I had a report back. I had an email the next day saying, we did it again. And they played it on their own. Yes! I said, right, well, the next thing is to bring more children into it. And she went, what? My job's not finished. And I went, nope. Move it on to the next step. But it was just wonderful. And actually, for me, the really exciting thing was that when we then went back indoors after playtime, Janet went and hid in the corridor away from her teaching assistant. And I was so pleased that the teaching assistant didn't go, oh, it's time to go into lessons. Oh, we're going to be late. She took the time to find her and to engage and explore with her, just to reinforce that activity. Yeah, it was just one of those really special times, and you just think, yeah, I so love this job. It's just so much fun. So it is about setting up those structured... The thing I would say about that is make sure you choose activities that the child can understand the rules of the game too. Because another school that I'd done that with, the next time, because they were successful with hide and seek, they did something called grandmother's footsteps, which is where somebody at the back turns their back, and when their back's turned, you creep up to them, and then you have to be statues when they turn around. And then when someone gets to a certain point, everybody has to run home before... Oh, it's really complicated. And they tried to introduce this with one of the young men with charge that I work with. And bless him, he was watching his peers, and, all right, they're creeping. Of course, the person at the front turns around. He can't see that the person at the front's turned around, so he's still creeping. And then, oh, they've all stopped. So he stops quite late. And then all his mates are running away, and he's like, what? What's happening here? So then he's following them, but he just didn't understand the rules of the game. But hide and seek, he did understand the rules of the game, and so was really an equal partner in that activity. Provide a safe space for individual group discussions and conversations. That's really important too. It's important for lots of reasons. It's important because of the sensory issues, and David talked about that. And it was something that came up in my research, that teachers were saying it's important to have a safe rest area. And I would take that a step further and say, yeah, it's a rest area, but it's also somewhere where they can engage with their peers in a meaningful way. So one little ad, in a nursery, we've got a pop-up tent, and that's his safe area. And sometimes, you know, when he goes in there, he needs to be on his own, because that's his space to go to help himself, get himself regulated so he can carry on with activities. Other times, he takes a peer by the hand and takes them into the tent with him. I'm not entirely sure what goes on in there, but the giggling that happens means that there's something very positive going on, which is lovely. But then I've got teenagers I've got one young man in a comprehensive school, 2,000 students. That's big in the UK. They're not very often that big, and that is enormous. And break times. I hate it. Any change of lessons, I'm in the corridor, flat against the wall, just waiting for them all to go, because it's all really... It scares me. You know, these great big lads come lumbering past you and just, oh my goodness. So we defined an area that he can go to with some friends, and they sit down together. They have a cup of tea. They've got facilities to make a hot drink together. There's a snack there, and they can choose music to put on or other things that they want to do together. Okay, it really helps support those relationships, those peer interactions. So that's just where I've got to so far. We've still got a long way to go in this. Megan, that's here, one of Tim's students from the States, she's starting to do some work on play, on the early play, and how to support parents of children with charge bring on their play skills, because that's where a lot of it starts. And she has left now, but I said to her, I'm going to say again, Megan, you need to get your dissertation written up, and you need to get it out there and sharing it with us, because it's really important. So look at, what's Megan's surname? That's right, Nancy can't remember either, both of us. But you need to look out for that, because I'm... Pardon? Oh, Schmittel. Is that German? Ah, there we go. So Megan Schmittel, there we go. So look out for that name, because she's actually looking at something now that's going to be really helpful for us, I think. So I hope that's been helpful for you. Do come and talk to me if you've got any ideas of things that you've found have worked for you, because I'd really like to know, because then we can share them with other families as well. But keep up the good work, because you're all fab. Oh, I've seen so much good parenting going on here. You're just amazing people. So thank you so much for inviting me again, and we'll keep in touch.
Vielen Dank, Gail. Thank you, Gail. We have.
Thank you, Gail.
Wir haben Mittagessen
It's lunchtime, almost. Lunch will be ready at noon. And then we'll have one more presentation by Tim at 1:30. So you're all invited. I hope that, again, so many of you will come and attend. Last presentation at 1:30, and then we'll have done it.